Let's dive right into today's discussion and uncover what's holding organizations back from achieving data-driven success. So, Paul, what are the most significant pain points you see organizations face when it comes to managing their data?
Yeah, so still one of the biggest ones is obviously getting the data into people's hands, and doing it in a way that allows them to innovate and solve real world business problems. It's a significant uh, something or other. So we're in the same.
Well, like getting it into people's hands, like what does that mean? Is it just like I can't get access to my own data? What does that mean?
Yeah,
It's fun.
yeah. So getting the data into people's hands and in a way that allows them to innovate around that is a huge challenge.
It's still a huge challenge. Like,
Yeah,
hey, give me a report is still a huge challenge.
yeah. Most of the time, the data is still held centrally, and so the business feels like they don't have access to do what they need to do with it.
Okay.
And
We
inside,
didn't get into the citizen worlds and everyone's got Power BI and they run their own reports. We're still not there.
if the business understands the underlying data structure and is able to do the kinds of things they need to do with it, I think that's the challenge. And so you've still got this situation where inside of these central data management functions, they understand the underlying data, the structure of it, and how it works, the transformation, the logic that's associated with it. But the business understands the business problems. So how do you bring those two things together? And this is a real pain point, and requires a cultural shift to solve the problem.
Why a cultural shift? That I don't get. Like, is it this idea that the people that control the data and the people that use the data don't know about each other, or is it more just help me understand cultural shift?
Yeah, regardless of whether you're building traditional analytics solutions or predictive AI machine learning, you need to understand the business problem really well. And so if you're not close enough to it on a day-to-day basis, it's hard to build solutions that actually solve the problems. And so that cultural divide and the centralized ownership of data versus the, I suppose you want to call it, democratization of that data and how it's used, is the barrier you're trying to solve. And even though you might have opportunities to and tools and platforms to get the data out there and do more sharing, the reality is the cultural problems are not solved by putting your data in the cloud, for example.
I mean, is that why we get like 300 versions of the truth? We thought we were going to move to the cloud and centralize, but basically people are taking data out of systems they have that are hard to get to, put it in the cloud, and sort of do it up there. And then you get different people working on their internal warehouses, and all of a sudden, you don't know what's what, like, or what's going on there.
On the democratization piece. So I want to innovate around that data. I'm a business person. I've got a problem to solve. I've got revenue to generate. I've got operational efficiencies to find, but I'm not able to do that if I can't get access to the data. So I'll grab the data from wherever I need to grab it from. I'll piece it together to try and get the best answer I can.
Yeah.
And that leads to these different sources of truth. And you hear these stories all the time about, different numbers getting reported up the chain, like how many, simple things like how many customers do we have? Well, depends on your definition of customer and who defined customer. And is it coming from the marketing department? Is it coming from the sales department? Is it from...
You're as old as me, Paul. Like, weren't we dealing with this in 1998? Like, didn't we go move to like Snowflake models and try centralized repositories and create governance models and create data? Like, why are we still not there? I don't get it.
Yeah, the problems haven't fundamentally changed in 25 years. I think what has changed, though, is the tools. So there is a different toolkit. And, most technologies are moving towards cloud-based, like all the vendors are moving towards cloud-based solutions. And so organizations are moving with that trend. But there's still this situation where they don't know what they don't know, or probably more accurately, they don't see what they don't see about the shortcomings of their data management operating model. So they go about their business in a particular way today. it kind of works. People get reports out, they pull reports and so on. But, is that really adding the value? And when you tie that back to the bigger picture of let's move all of our data onto the cloud, and that isn't low cost, and it isn't necessarily going to save you money doing that. How can I get the benefit out of it? And I think with my clients, that's the biggest gap in their thinking, is just how they're able to leverage what they're doing with the new tools, the new environments, in order to get the benefit in relation to the cost.
So is this ability, okay, we'll go back to our age, right? If you're thinking 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the core issue we had was computational power, right? And so when you were trying to create reporting structures, you wanted to create aggregations to minimize computational power every time, because you were hey, it takes too long, right? And all of a sudden, I'm not sure that's an issue. So can we go back to hey, I can have my atomic level data. I just need sort of a dictionary on what it is, and I'll just do all the computation. And so I don't have to pre-think about what I need to do. Are we there yet, or is it still kind of a back?
No, is the short answer. We're not really there. I think the motivations for building that semantic layer or pre-transformation layer is different from what they were before. I think
walk me through that.
Because I think the processing and computational side is more optimized now than it was before. So before we had to have landing, staging, repo, we had to transform the data in layers gradually.
Yeah,
you still need to do that. And one of the challenges, I think,
why? Can you just get dumb version for me? Why do we still have to do that?
Well, most organizations are still centering themselves around a set of archetypes. So in this case, it's the medallion architecture now. It's kind of
I'm old. Okay, I don't know any of it.
New thing,
okay,
right? Let's simplify it to bronze, silver, and gold. But if you think about the activities that you need to perform to take something out of a source system in its relational model and then get it to where I need it to be in terms of some insight analytic, then I need to be able to get it from what it is to what it needs to be. Those activities haven't fundamentally changed. People think, I believe, that machine learning and AI, because it taps in lower into that stack, somehow means that you don't have to do that work. The reality is that if you're modeling it in machine learning and AI, you still need to understand the processes. You still need to understand the model inputs and outputs. You still, so all of those activities still need to be done. And that means that the people building these new data warehousing solutions in the cloud are still needing to understand those things. And now we circle back to the cultural change, because if you're not close enough to the business to understand those problems, how do you create an architecture and a model that services that analytic need and also puts you in a position where you're ready for machine learning?
But architecture still won't solve quality of data problems, right? So you solve the architecture problem, let's say, but you can still get garbage data in. So you have to have some sort of quality control. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, okay, I understand the upfront work that you need to do to make sure the data makes sense and is repeatably aggregatable in ways you want, so you get the same answers.
Fair enough. Most clients struggle with the process of data quality improvement and augmentation more than they struggle with the tooling of it.
Okay, help me understand. Is there an example there that can make it real for me?
Yeah, so you have some dirty data come in, and it could be tuned and corrected and improved, and probably in some cases using some fairly standard rules. This is kind of in the traditional model rather than in the kind of AI machine learning space. But that it needs to be done and it needs to be improved. But how do you actually have the business take ownership of wanting to correct that data and wanting to make sure that the business process is reflected through into the way that the systems are used in a consistent way, and what that means for the data. So
like I have an example where like this is the hard problem, right? So like let's talk about like there's a hospital group out there, won't name them, and they have they have patient centric data, so they have an EMR system with patient data, and that patient you go in for a CAT scan, you get a lab done, and it's got to get filed. And if it's in the system, if it's within the hospital, no problem. They've got the sort of cleansing rules and the relational data systems that comes in, and it's like stored in the right place in their EMR. But if you go and do it at like Life Labs or somewhere else, and that data gets sent in, sometimes it's a fax, still happens, PDF, scanned document, and it gets misfiled. And we're at like frontline support, right? Like these are nurses and doctors filing this shit, and they get it wrong. John Smith is John Smith, is Paul Taylor is Paul Taylor, Smith, right? Like. And so all of a sudden, over months and years, what became pristine like patient data is now garbage patient data. Like,
yeah,
can you solve that with process today?
It's fairly, what I've seen is fairly consistent across the client. I think with core business principles and objects within the data ecosystem, they understand the importance of that. So, even if they're not actually strictly doing master data management,
right,
they're still implementing some of those principles through what they do. It's like they understand they need a single patient. They understand they need a single view of the customer or the distributor or whatever, because without that you don't have the fundamentals. There's varying different levels of quality, but there's quite a lot wrapped up in your question. There's the unstructured data side to it, but I think one of the things that the advent of AI and machine learning can really do before it hits the core business processes is to supplement some of these capabilities that we haven't had very effective access to before. And
that's right on the head.
In the data quality space, right, for sure. It's like
that particular problem actually got solved by an automation engine and an AI engine reading the data and validating its right customer. So, like to me, we can now do post facto cleansing, which we couldn't do before, at scale, which we couldn't do before, and so like the patterns of how we do data probably have to change. Like I don't think we're fixing busy people's lives to put in data correctly. I think you're probably doing, hey, here's a great place for machine learning and AI to come in and sort of do cleansing and then create that.
And most organizations honestly aren't at the point where they have the comfort level to allow that to go to the next stage. And by the way, I don't think the space is there yet in terms of using inference to fill the gaps in the data.
That's scary.
But I think it does speak to overcoming the challenge of how do I sync up between my core systems, and what I'm seeing, as a solid foundation for data for analytic machine learning AI use cases across the board, right?